Hey guys, it's Mitch. How's it going? Alright, we're looking today at Rob Liefeld's attempt to get in on the bad girl trend in 1995. We're looking at Avengelyne #1 from Maximum Press. So if you were buying comics in 1995, you probably remember seeing this at least in a bunch of ads in Wizard or features, or you'd see photos of some reasonably attractive woman wearing a somewhat Avengelyne-like outfit. So that all started in 95 when, as I said, Rob Liefeld was looking to get in on the current bad girl trend. He did have a leading female character in Glory that he was, starting to feature kind of prominently. But, Glory's always been kind of analogous to Wonder Woman. And Wonder Woman, try as DC might, was never really a bad girl character. Rob Liefeld wanted something that was on the level of, like, Lady Death, or Vampirella, or She. The titles that were getting big at the time. We know he was paying attention to Witchblade because he tried to get Michael Turner for some projects, and that didn't turn out so well. But anyway, eventually this desire to get in on the bad girl market led to a discussion, conversation, brainstorming session, what have you, with Tony Libido. Tony Libido was a guy who was kind of instrumental at the beginning of Image Comics. He had a role in publishing and editing, if anybody did, I suppose, and kind of parlayed that into a role at Top Cow Studios before departing from them. In 95, I don't think he was really working with Rob Liefeld officially, but he was a guy that Rob Liefeld would go to talk about business. So Liefeld and Libido, which sounds like a detective show, were having this discussion, and Libido's wife, Kathy Christian, was also there. Kathy Christian was a woman who'd done some modeling. She'd worked for Harris Comics, where she was the Vampirella model at conventions, which I think she enjoyed, but didn't really like the fact that she didn't have any kind of ownership of the character. That was a long-standing character. She was never going to get a piece of that. So it was always on like a work-for-hire basis. And if Harris decided to move on, there wasn't a whole lot she could do about it. So she was looking for a way to kind of boost that back up. And, Liefeld and Libido talking about trying to come up with a new bad girl character, that kind of seemed to work together. They started talking about this in terms of coming up with a character where Kathy could model the look and she'd also have some kind of ownership of the character. Originally, Liefeld was thinking, like a vampire girl, but of course, Harris already had Vampirella. That had kind of cornered the market there. And if they come up with a character, and Kathy Christian's modeling the outfit, and of course, she had her previous history as a Vampirella model, then obviously Harris is going to come out to them, sue them for copyright infringement. So they decided to go a different way, coming up with an angel character, a fallen angel, who beats up demons with a sword. That's about all they had. But it was more than enough for Rob Liefeld to think it was an idea, so that was the plan going forward. They were going to put out a comic about some bad girl fallen angel character. It sounded perfect. It did also tie in, of course, with Rob Liefeld's background, where his dad was a minister, and there was the thing in the mid-90s where angels were starting to get a bit of a higher profile in the media. I'm thinking of The Prophecy. There was the Touched by an Angel show. Millennium came out not too long after this. I don't really think it was Liefeld trying to lock into a trend on that side of things, but it did kind of coincide nicely because, the year 2000 thing was coming up and there was all sorts of end-of-the-world media coming out. So maybe it's just everybody had angels on the brain. I don't know. So they came up with the name Avengelyne, which isn't a bad name at all, really. And this was going to be one of the first titles from Rob's new venture, which was Maximum Press, where he came up with his own publishing company that was separate from Image while he still had Extreme Studios at Image Comics. So this new property that was going to be a hit, naturally, would have nothing to do with the Image universe. He didn't have to worry about any kind of legal red tape there, or about having his new creation be just another Image book. It was part of this exciting new thing he was doing. And he got together a team, most of whom were either ex-Extreme Studios guys or guys currently working at Extreme Studios and didn't mind picking up a little bit of extra work. A couple were kind of newer guys who had gotten a few pages in, but hadn't really been able to cut their teeth on their own series just yet. In that regard, I'm talking specifically about John Stinsman, the penciler on the comic, who was not ready for prime time in my opinion. And they were able to get that first issue out, so now we can take a look at it. Let's start with the cover here. Yes, it is a shiny chromium mess and wraparound, naturally. So as we can see, Liefeld went all out on this. This is the same kind of treatment they put on Pfft Volume 2, #1, where it's not just chromium, it's also embossed. Maybe a little bit of debossing going on. Really trying to juice this thing up as much as possible to try and, this is probably going to be one of his main titles going forward. So he wanted the #1 to be a big launch. So yeah, you throw all sorts of gimmicks on the cover there, along with a nice design. I will say that. I like the symmetrical setup we've got with these two kind of bookmark things. And then a more conventional kind of shot for the foreground here, making sure, of course, to get our bad girl character front and center for the main cover here. On the back, we've got some kind of demon guy with a little bit of a Joe Madureira sneer. It doesn't look too bad, and I mean, he is actually going to show up in the first issue here. We don't even have to wait to see him or anything. And honestly, he ends up looking fairly decent throughout. Some nice shadows going on, got some uplighting here, and fair amount of work on the backgrounds. I did notice that the penciler, in this case, John Stinsman, he's got some difficulties. I'll start off by saying that. Most of which have to do with figures and faces, which is a little bit of a problem when you're drawing a comic book featuring, people. A lot of the kind of stuff around that, though, he's not too bad at. Like I said, his shadowing is pretty good. He is putting a fair bit of detail into, like, the church here. Like, yeah, he does seem to put a lot of sweat equity into his backgrounds, and that I can appreciate. I don't know that he has any particular talent for backgrounds. Like, it doesn't seem to me like he really enjoys doing backgrounds all that much, but he knows what needs to be put on the page, and he knows you don't just put a basic structure. So I dig that. And again, like kind of putting this at a bit of an angle. Is it at an angle? Well, the church is at an angle. None of the figures are. Maybe the church is kind of, it's built on a sinkhole. Let's say that. Got our big Stephen Platt moon here. Like, that is quite Stephen Platt looking. Yeah, like all the satellite elements are actually like fine in this. Absolutely. It's the figures and it's the faces in particular that bother me. The demon thing here, not bad at all. I got no problems with that. Although, like I said, I see a little bit of Joe Mad influence in there. I don't know if he's looking at something directly for that. When it comes to drawing like a woman standing in just about any kind of pose, it ends up looking pretty stiff. The proportions are a little wonky. The upper body tends to get kind of short, while all the limbs, those are all get kind of stretched out. And he has difficulty remembering to put a neck in there. So that's a little rough. The faces as well are quite awkward. There's some kind of style he's going for here. It reminds me a little bit of maybe what was going on in, I want to say, New Men. I don't know, some Extreme Studios book, where it feels like it's vaguely manga related, but then kind of inexpertly done. It feels like the kind of thing where some teenager found a new style he likes and like 2 weeks ago, and he's working on trying to replicate it, and he hasn't gotten really anywhere close just yet. You'll see what I mean. The cover here, I think, is probably the best version of his figures and his faces at this point. Like, this is all, the 1995 version of John Stinsman, who he was one of those guys who hadn't gotten much work yet at Extreme Studios, a little bit here and there. He was still pretty green. And he obviously had a long way to go. I think these days he's much more recognized as an indie creator. But yeah, before we get into it, just looking at the cover here, all the stuff that got thrown on here, the wraparound cover, all the chromium, all that stuff, it kind of has to be pointed out that it all kind of worked. Avengelyne #1, I think, debuted at the number 15 spot for the month that it was ordered. It's not a top 10 book. That's reserved for X Books and Spawn, and whatever new hotness is coming along. Like Gen 13 would take over the top 10 for a little while. But I mean, considering that at this point, this is an independent publisher that doesn't have the might of Image behind it, like a debut at the 15th spot is actually pretty impressive. And for the first year of the comic, and I mean, Avengelyne comics did come out pretty regularly for the first year of Maximum Press. Some kind of Avengelyne comic, not necessarily the Avengelyne main series, maybe Avengelyne in Glory, or the Avengelyne in Glory swimsuit edition. I think that happened too. And all those books kind of fluctuated between 15th and 40th for their respective months, with none falling below 40. So you have to say that Rob Liefeld was kind of right when he decided he wanted to get into the bad girl trend. I've laughed at Rob before for trying to jump onto some kind of bandwagon, where it seems like he's desperate to try and latch on to whatever new craze is going through comics at the time. But, I mean, this is the one where it worked. It's still fairly early in his career. I mean, Image has only been around for like 3 years at this point. So it's an early justification for doing it again in the future. I don't think it ever really worked nearly as well as it did with Avengelyne here. But you can understand the thinking at least. Like, it worked that one time. It'll probably work again. And, that part he was wrong on. So, all right, let's get into it here, and we'll try not to get blinded in the meantime. So we're starting out in New York, and we're going to get first-person narration from Avengelyne, who has just been kicked out of heaven. We're not going to find out why in this issue, though. We are going to get a lot of narration about heaven was so great. Everything I ever needed, I always had. I didn't have to worry about getting sick, about getting injured, or anything like that. All I had to do was be devoted to God, and then God would take care of me. And then apparently something happened that changed that. And like I said, there's those backgrounds that definitely have a lot of work put into them. But it doesn't seem like the kind of thing where he's developed a real technique for it just yet. He's got the basics for perspective down, so that's always a good start. He's lighting them okay, but it is still very basic shapes and then grid patterns. This is the kind of thing pretty much anybody can do for backgrounds. I'll do this for backgrounds, for Christ's sake. But when you see it on the page, it does work. You do see the amount of work on the page, and that does, it just kind of convinces your brain, these are appropriate backgrounds. So she manages to fish an extra long trench coat out of the garbage, and she's wandering around in the rain. She's scared. She's cold for the first time. All the people she runs into seem to be scumbags. Some dude propositions her right away. And she manages to stumble upon a bunch of homeless people in an alley, only it turns out the homeless people are demons. And they recognize her for what she is, so we're establishing that right off the bat. There are demons everywhere in New York. I don't think most people would be too surprised by that. And, they're intimidating. They don't entirely seem aggressive right off the bat. And but Avengelyne, she's not prepared to handle this right now, so she just runs away in the rain. And looking at the pages, they're not great, unfortunately. There is a lot of black on the page that helps, considering we're trying to set, kind of a mood where everything is dark and nasty and foreboding. Going with the black panel borders, that certainly helps. A reasonable amount of shadows everywhere. That's all okay stuff. It just kind of comes down to the mechanics, really. For instance, John Stinsman, at this time at least, he's not very good with hanging drapery. All the figures, again, look kind of stiff. And when we get to close-ups of the faces, it's not really 100% there. It's not quite a professional quality. They are able to mask it a little bit with the amount of shadow that he's throwing on everything. We're plastering Evangelyne's hair to her face here, so that covers up a fair amount, and we're throwing rain kind of textures all over everything. So it might take you a minute to register that, it's not quite up to snuff. This shot looks okay, this close-up of a face, but this is a face that anybody who draws comics should be able to do. So she keeps walking through the rain and stumbles upon a church. Very nice looking church. Came up with some nice textures for the brickwork here. That's good stuff. And again, put in the work. Put in a lot of leaves on these trees, some pretty good shadows. Put in a bunch of graffiti on the wall. Drew everything he had to draw, and drew a little bit more than that. So again, I appreciate the amount of work going into it. Oh, rough looking feet. But, everybody has problems with feet. She goes inside, and she's kind of comforted, because, this all seems very familiar. It's got the right kind of ambiance that she's looking for. Little thing here where she, there's all sorts of candles lit. She looks in the flames, and starts to see demons in those too. And, we get a big old no, and she passes out. Trying to do some kind of creative stuff with the panels here. The page design, don't mind that. Again, we can see the faces here are kind of rough, but then again, this is a little bit of a smaller panel. Maybe it's okay. Oh, no, it's not really. So, this is the problem right here, is that you've got your bad girl comic, and the guy you got penciling it can't really draw a woman's face. Nothing looks quite right. The eyes aren't quite on the right plane. The mouth looks a little askew, and the lips are all inflated, which, maybe that's just what they're going for. That's fine. It looks like from this angle, if you draw half a face, he's okay. But again, this is the kind of thing where when you're practicing drawing, anybody should be able to knock that out. So we've established he's not very good at drawing faces, and he's not really good at drawing figures. So yeah, you've got your bad girl comic, and the fundamental part doesn't work. So theoretically, the comic shouldn't work. But like I said, this was quite a success, really. Again, at least for that first year, which I think just kind of proves that at this time, you throw the right kind of packaging on a comic, and you could guarantee sales. And in this case, the right kind of packaging wasn't the chromium, it was the tits. That is one thing John Stinsman looks like he's worked on a bit, is figuring out how to draw a woman's tits, which is important for this comic. So that just kind of understates. It doesn't really matter the quality of the tits so long as the tits are there. Everything around the tits are kind of trying to convince you that there's quality going on. You know, like there's quality inkers on this. This is inked by Jonathan Sabal and Danny Meeke. The colors all look about right. You know, it's nothing special, but it's pretty much standard for 1995, or at least for Extreme Studios for 1995. You got the big flashy chromium cover. You got, you know, like a pretty nice logo and everything. She's holding a big old sword, so she's obviously a bad girl, and that's all enough to convince people to buy the comic and to keep coming back to buy the comic. So yeah, anyway, Avengelyne passed out. She gets woken up by what I suppose is a handsome, like, priest. Again, he's not doing too great with the dude's faces either, a little bit better. It mostly comes down to those, like, fucking glassy, bulbous eyes. Draws them on everybody, and it never looks right. And, you know, this is all just him being comforting, and that's about it. But, you know, we are going to get a fair amount of talking head sequences in this, and this is the quality of the heads that are talking. So again, I'm not entirely sure what people were thinking in 1995, that they felt they needed to keep buying this. I would think, you know, if I picked this up, what was the price on this? $350 American in 95. That's a little steep. And, you know, you get your glossy cover, you open it up, and it looks like this. I'd be like, yeah, no, that's all my money you're going to get, man. And they're just comforting. You know, I guess this is kind of their meet cute. It's not particularly convincing. This is going to be scripted by Robert Napton. He's done a lot of work for Rob Liefeld around this time. He's not particularly good. I don't think I've ever seen anything creative that he's done. I haven't read a ton of Robert Napton, but I've seen enough to just, like, I don't exactly get fired up when I see Robert Napton scripting a book. It's a bit like Scott Lobdell. If Scott Lobdell, instead of writing everybody like they're quippy teenagers, wrote everybody like they're cliches. So, you know, there's no interesting story progression and there's no interesting dialogue. Again, it's a little hard to get worked up. So while our priest is making a connection with the pretty girl who doesn't know what handkerchiefs are, the older priest comes up behind him and he's like, yo, dude, I don't know if you noticed the collar you got on. You shouldn't be, like, talking to this girl like this. And oh, dear God, here we go. There are a bunch of vertical double page spreads in this. So anyway, they're aware that she has nowhere to go. She feels like she's on the run from somebody. She won't tell them her name. And they figure the mission's going to be closed for the night. And they figure the mission is not going to have any room for her, so they're going to let her sleep in the church. The priest has Sister Janice find her something to wear, which turns out to be a sheer dressing shirt. Like, we're just flat out going to show her nipples, basically. And they show her up to where she's going to be sleeping, which seems to be on, like, purple satin. I guess the priests get a little freaky sometimes. And they leave her for the night. But yeah, I guess this is kind of the draw for the book. Again, like, if you're going like that, then I guess that's all right. This is the stuff that John Stensman appears to have worked on. But yeah, no, that face it's some rough business. I don't know, maybe you just got to put a paper bag over her. See, there we go, another double page spread. So this is Avengelyne having herself a dream. And she's dreaming of the past where she was part of the host of angels and they waged war on hell with a bunch of pretty generic looking demons. But again, there's some effort in the gates here. I don't mind that. And the pose here is pretty funky, but, you know, if you can separate the figure from the background, then you can use that in all sorts of advertising. Interesting thing about the pose is that it does appear to be pretty much properly proportioned. I don't know if there was any actual posing from Kathy Christian on this, because, of course, the look for the character is kind of based on Kathy Christian, although John Stensman couldn't really draw her very well. But, like, yeah, these proportions seem about right. It almost feels like he's going for a Liefeld extreme back arch. But then he didn't do the thing where you thrust the hips back as well. So, you know, she kind of accordions in. So it does look like she's pretty fucking hammered. And she's just stumbling around in front of the gates of hell here. Figure doesn't look too bad, though. So, I mean, yeah, maybe that was actually modeled for that one. And, of course, she wakes up yelling with, like, thunder and shit. Okay, that's it. So at least we have something now. We have a little bit of backstory. You know, she's been kind of vaguely talking about how she's an angel without specifically stating that she's an angel. Now it's still, I mean, she still hasn't said it, but it's pretty much all on the table now. So now we're going to cut to the next day where the priest is showing her around the grounds. And some dude shows up who's very clearly evil. You know, he's got his goatee, he's got the silver streak in his hair, he's got a ponytail going on. Ponytails are evil. And, of course, his eyes are red. 6 foot wide shoulders, too. That also intimidating aura. And again, all these figures are stiff as hell. It's tough for guys at this time coming up in the Extreme Studios system, eh? Because, like, you're trying to break into comics, and you figure, okay, I'm going to get in there, and maybe I don't have what it takes right away, but, like, I've got some good, like, basics. And then I'll be working with guys who can give me pointers. And I'll learn, like, techniques from them, and they'll show me books I should be referencing. They'll introduce me to other guys who, like, have more techniques. You know, I can start networking and stuff. And the thing is, for young guys coming into Extreme Studios, it sounds like nobody really learned anything because there was nobody to learn it from. The best they had was Rob Liefeld, who knew nothing about fundamentals. Still doesn't 35 years later. The only guy there who was any good was Stephen Platt, and Stephen Platt was too busy looking down his nose at everybody to tell anybody how to draw anything. You know, guys have said there was no art direction at Extreme Studios. Just you completed your pages, and if you were one of the guys that had sucked up to Rob enough, then he said they were great. If you weren't, then he said you weren't doing a good enough job. I should say I don't have any confirmation for this. This is just stuff I've heard. I don't know any of these guys. I'm just a dude who stands in his house at midnight and yells at his phone. So anyway, I got way off track there. We were talking about comics. Let's get back to the comic. So the evil guy being introduced is Mr. Belial, and he's accompanied by his glamorous assistant, Helena, or Helana. Maybe it's Helana. Apparently, Mr. Belial is the guy who's going to be buying the church because the church is in financial peril. And he's very interested in the girl that, she's not wearing the sheer outfit anymore, but maybe he can sense that she was wearing a sheer outfit. Oh, look, he's got a little pentagram on his cane. That's cute. Now we're going to get a poster featuring Kathy Christian. You know, kind of looks like the character a little bit. And this, of course, is the woman that people who were reading comics in the 90s will have seen in Wizard all the time because Rob Liefeld was in Gareb Shamus's ear constantly about featuring this stuff. Oh, we got an ad for Bad Rock, too. There we go. Now we can get back to it. Anyway, Avengelyne is very uncomfortable around the evil guy. So the priest here kind of just shuttles her away. And she kind of glassy-eyed stares off into the distance. And evil guy says that he is very interested in her. We get the close-up on the eyes. In case we missed, they are red. So yes, evil. Is it a goatee or is it a Hulk Hogan mustache? I think it might be the handlebar. Anyway, from there, the priest is going to take her to a diner where she's finally going to tell him her name. And he's just going to be like, Avengelyne, that's your name? Like, I don't mean your stripper name. What's your name, like your birth name? And she's like, I had it legally changed. And he's like, okay, that sounds awesome. And they're trying to figure out where to put her. They do eventually come to the conclusion that she can work at the convent for the nuns there. And she's super stoked about that. That's her happy face. This is her goldfish face, I suppose. She really only seems to have the two modes. Oh shit, another vertical double page spread. Okay, so now we're going to cut to a demon guy. And this is Mr. Belial. This is his demon form. I mean, at least, like, we're not dicking around and going, oh, maybe he's not so evil with his red eyes. He's like, no, he's very evil. It's fine. And his lovely assistant, Helena, here, again, she's also in her demon form. She's found out that this is Avengelyne. She's one of the war host. And Belial's like, that's fine. I want to find out some more information about her. Helena's like, well, why don't I just go run out and kill her? And, you know, Belial's like, no, if you kill her, then I don't find anything interesting out. So, like, don't do that, please. We're going to test her instead. Not a bad shot of the demon guy here. He does look a fair bit like a late 80s action figure. But the figure looks decent. And I mean, he is using the space properly by having him, like, dominate the page. That's kind of how you should do that. I wonder if Todd was pissed off about having little skulls as his cape holder. You know, Todd McFarlane was the guy who led the charge to get Rob kicked out of Image like a year after this. I wonder if it all started with the skulls. I wouldn't be surprised with Todd. But yeah, no, as far as a vertical double page spread goes, you know, I don't like those, but this is about as well executed as I think I've seen an Extreme Studios guy do that at least, so good on him for that. Okay, elsewhere, the two priests are talking about what to do with Avengelyne, and talking a little bit about how Mr. Belial is going to buy the church. And, you know, he's a good guy because he does all sorts of philanthropic work. And then we have to cut to Avengelyne's ass. It's okay. A little, not the best placement, because, you know, he's got her feet running off the end of the page here. So it does just kind of look like her legs below the knees are extremely stumpy. Then we're going to cut to Avengelyne, who's walking around outside, and she gets jumped by some demons. Again, kind of generic-looking demons, but At least we're going to get an action sequence, I guess, as they leap into the fray. And this is all executed okay, actually, I'd say. You know, standard leaping pose, a little bit of coming up with something a little bit creative for the page design here. It's a little bit of a mess in the middle, but at least having, you know, like the whole thing here is that she's not armed, and she, I don't know, throws something at one of the demons here, so he loses his sword and it goes flying, and she catches it, so now she's armed. By popping the sword out from the panel borders, you know, like multiple times, at least that draws some attention to it. That's all right. And I mean, that's a fun drawing where she does something to this guy. It kind of looks like she cuts the top of his head off, like at the jaw. Again, I don't think it ends up looking exactly great, but it is kind of fun. And naturally, she kills every single demon. But that was kind of expected, right? I mean, like, not just from the reader, that's also expected from Mr. Evil here. And he's, like, speaking directly into her mind. He calls her to his limo and says, you know, I want you working for me. I was a fallen angel, too, one time. It was a while back, but, you know, I know where you're coming from, and I'd kind of like to set you on the same path. And she declines. He's like, that's okay. I'm going to be in every issue going forward. I don't particularly care. And we get a shot of Avengelyne and her bowling ball tits to end on. And that's it for the issue. Next issue is going to be Avengelyne versus Helena. Okay, well, that's a logical next step. Sure. And then we get our credits. Avengelyne created by Rob Liefeld and Kathy Christian, so she does have an ownership stake in the character. Like I said, script Rob Napton, penciler John Stinsman, inkers Jonathan Sabal and Danny Miki. I don't recognize too many more of the names except for Kurt Hathaway on letters, naturally. And Avengelyne is based on the likeness of Kathy Christian. I'll take your word for it. Oh, we got the whole thing down here with promotions and marketing by Paul Scott, which of course is also Rob Liefeld. Dude, just hire another guy, for fuck's sake. And of course, this is the early days of Rob launching new number ones. Still kind of early anyway. So he has to put a little note in the back saying how excited he is that he's launching another number one. And Maximum Press is going to change the face of comics, yo. They're doing exciting new things that aren't just the regular superhero things, like in War Child, where it's exactly what he's been doing in Extreme Studios. And, you know, we get some thank yous here, and we're very excited about Avengelyne and the endless story opportunities that have presented itself. Oh, dude, come on, Rob, get an editor. Hers is an endless struggle between the forces of light and darkness and her ultimate place in it. In what? The forces of light and darkness? For fuck's sake, man. Anyway, that is Avengelyne number one. There's not a lot to it, really. It feels like there's a little bit more than usual for Extreme Studios. I will say that. It does feel like we're setting up some kind of story. I mean, I'm pretty sure it's going to be the same kind of story where we got our protagonist and we've got our antagonist, and protagonist is going to have to fight all of the antagonist goons until she fights the antagonist and wins. And it's like, well, yeah, but that's a whole lot of stories, man. Like, it's all about the twists and turns on the way. It's like, do we think that there are going to be any twists and turns on the way? I don't really see it happening, personally. For the book itself, yeah, it was quite a success for that first year. After the first year, it dropped down pretty far. But, I mean, at that point, Rob had all sorts of problems going on. I mean, for one thing, comics had all sorts of problems going on because the speculator bubble had burst. Bad girls were starting to slow down as a trend. And, of course, he was getting his ass booted out of Image. So, I mean, you know, the Avengelyne train did eventually kind of grind to a halt, but I don't know if it was necessarily the fault of the book or just kind of the circumstances around it. It's not a particularly great book or anything, but people buy shit books all the time. It is interesting to note that, you know, over the next few years, Rob was leveraging different kinds of properties. Some he lost the rights to completely, like Youngblood. He always held on to Avengelyne, though, and the reason, of course, is because of licensing. Rob started striking deals pretty early on to try and get Avengelyne developed into something anyways, like a movie, TV series, something like that. Like, particularly at the end of the 90s, that was when that kind of thing actually stood a chance. And I mean, it is the kind of concept that you can sell pretty quick. It's like, yeah, no, there's a fallen angel girl, and she fights demons with a sword, and she has to fight a big demon. You know, Rob Liefeld at least can sell that. And he's done it multiple times. Like, he's licensed Avengelyne at least 3 times that I know of. And every time it's like, we're finally getting the Avengelyne movie we've been waiting for. Meanwhile, 30 years later, no movie has ever been developed. No TV show. Nothing featuring any Extreme Studios property has ever turned into anything. And I've talked about this before. I don't think necessarily that Rob Liefeld needs it to turn into anything. I think it's the licensing that's the most important part, because he does get paid for that license. It's his business model, selling useless IP. Whether or not it turns into anything after that, that's not really up to him. But he did get that money for, the 5 years or whatever that a studio has their hands on his property. Anyway, that's probably enough of this. I've had this comic for a while. I put off doing a video on it just because I'm, just flipping through it. It's not going to be anything. There isn't a lot to talk about with the art other than, some of the drawbacks. And you just know with Rob, there's not going to be anything in the story whatsoever. At least there's all this stuff around it to talk about. That's why I spend so much time on that shit. I mean, hey, I got to do the fun comic earlier this week with the Ultimate Warrior #1. I guess this is the trade-off. Kind of a one for me, one for them. I just don't know who the them is in this case. Maybe it's you. Anyway, I'm actually going to go now. Thanks very much for watching, guys. If you got this far, don't forget to hit the like button, hit subscribe if you haven't already, and right about this time, you should be seeing a link for my Patreon, so you can go check that out if you want to. But yeah, that's going to do it. Thanks again for watching, guys. I'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye.